just because you have a title doesn't mean that you get to tell everybody how they're going to do their job because they're getting paid to do their job and they're the subject matter experts in that area.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest, Bob Hall. Now, Bob's got quite the diverse background in a couple of different industries. He's spent 28 years in the United States Air Force with 17 years focused on recruiting. So buckle up. We're going to be talking a lot about what recruiters look for and what they don't look for in this episode. And he's also currently recruiting for the United States federal workforce, which means he's recruited on both sides. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about how to find a project manager, what he looks for in project managers, and how he recruits for them. So welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks a lot, Trevor. I appreciate the opportunity.
So I'm going to start with the hot button topic that you kind of pulled some threads on I think it was a couple weeks ago, about military experience as a project manager is not the same as civilian experience as a project manager.
Oh, no, absolutely not. A lot of times some of the folks that reach out to us, they're like, well, hey, I was in charge of, and they think that qualifies as project manager. And what they don't understand is that, when you're in the military and you're a project manager, I'll put quotes around that.
You're titled the project manager.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. But they don't understand that because you're in logistics, say for example, and you have to pull supplies and you gotta coordinate some things, that directly transfers into a civilian role where project manager is a lot more specific. The background is a whole lot more detailed. And you're dealing with a whole separate set of customers, if you want to call it that. So yeah, there's a big difference between wearing the uniform as a project manager and being a civilian project manager.
Yeah, and I want to take a moment because I am prior military myself. So we talk a lot about learning project management skills in the military. And we do learn skills to manage things, but there's a big difference between those skills and being a formally trained project manager in the civilian world, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And not to take away from the skills part, because some of the skills, your mindset and how you think and stuff like that kind of transfer. That's fine. But let's be honest, in the military, when they say we need to get this done, X, Y, and Z, you have deadlines and things like that. And you certainly don't have an unlimited budget, but you're not concerned at all, honestly, about the return on investment. When you say, if you're the project manager and you have authority with that wearing a uniform, you're also wearing a rank. And so when you say make this happen to somebody with less stripes, less bars, less stars than you, they tend to make it happen. In the civilian world, it doesn't work that way necessarily. Just because you have a title doesn't mean that you get to tell everybody how they're going to do their job because they're getting paid to do their job and they're the subject matter experts in that area. So yeah, the skill set isn't a direct transfer. The mindset might be, but the skill set is not.
Yeah, because I know as a project manager, I have no authority over anybody on my team.
Right.
And I'm told by stakeholders, make this happen.
Oh, absolutely. And that's probably one of the funniest stories that I have as far as that goes is I had a retired Army colonel. So he's in 06 and he's a big wig and he had, according to his resume, he had thousands of people working for him and stuff like that. And then he became a civilian and he was working on a project and he said to me, he says, Bob, he says, I don't understand. I'm used to saying make it happen and it does. And people are telling me I can't do that they don't work for me. And I was like, they don't, and I'll just call them Jim for the sake of argument. But I said, Jim, they don't work for you. They work for the company that pays them. You're kind of in the central portion of this, and they're your customer as well as you're their customer. And he just couldn't wrap his head around that because as he worked his way up to '06 and Colonel and just saying, make it so, as Captain Kirk used to do on Star Trek. It doesn't work that way in the civilian sector.
Yeah, the magic hand wave doesn't work anymore in the civilian
No, it
world.
does not.
And it's a very, very astute topic to kind of digest and break down a little bit here because we talk about project management. And I think that in the military, it shouldn't even be called that because it's a totally different animal than it is in the civilian world.
And that's a great point because in the military, if you could use the terms action officer, you know, as opposed to project manager, I think that'd be a little more fitting. Just in the idea of you're the go-to person, you're the one that's going to create the action to happen. Using the word officer because it just kind of fits, but you're the action person. You know, but in reality, when you move over to the civilian side and you're the project manager, you're more of a coordinator, you're pulling strings, but you have to balance everything out amongst all the players in the project.
Yeah. And I've said, I've got a lot of Trevorisms, if you'll call them that. And
Yeah. I have a lot
one
of Bob
is,
Hall theory.
one is that project management is its own discipline for a reason.
Mhm.
You know, I will walk into meetings and I'll say, I'm the dumbest person in this room because my expertise is only in project management.
And I get that because again, you know, the military is a lot different, obviously. Um, But when people are looking for a civilian position, they say they're a project manager, and you just mentioned I'm the dumbest person in the room. They have to understand that because you were a project manager, say in logistics and moving parts and getting supplies where they need to be and stuff, that doesn't necessarily transfer over into the IT world. But yet you could be hired as a project manager in IT, for example, because you have the skills and the background to put it all together, but you have to learn everything that's involved in IT. It's not just getting parts to where the parts need to be.
And it's also, even as a civilian trained PM, get your PMP, get your Agile certification, your Scrum Master, all those things.
Yeah.
You still might not be able to translate between a logistical PM role and a IT PM role because there's a pretty big leap there
Yeah.
that not a lot of PM. I've seen a lot of PMs fail because they think, well, I can do it here, I can do it there, and their minds just don't expand out far enough to see the whole map versus just their ecosystem.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. One of my experiences, I'll say, is when I first came to the Air Force Civilian Service, doing what I do now. I recruited for IT folks, for the cyber folks, and we were looking for a project manager. And this fellow, had interviewed and that type of thing, and he said that, oh yeah, I can do all this, I can do all that, and we started talking about security issues, cybersecurity, bandwidth, those type things, and the glazed look on his face, you know, and I hate to say it, but again, just like any other civilian role, any other company hiring you, they need you to come in able to hit the ground running. It's not to say that you can't have a ramp up to your level of expertise, but you have to have a basic understanding about the terminology and the things people are talking about. And this one individual, and I felt bad for him, but I just had to explain to him, I'm sorry, you just don't have the depth that we need right now.
Yeah, I somewhat experienced that when I was a consultant for the Army on one of their software projects out at Fort Knox.
Hmm.
And I walked into this program and I'm just like, this software is, I'm familiar with it as a user, but I had no idea on the development side,
Right.
because it was also a secure system. So I had to deal with working in a skiff some of the
Hmm.
times. And then I also had to deal with the unclassified side. And it was just a really unique experience compared to a lot of other things I've done. And do you have any advice for working with the military? Because we all know we've been over what it's like to work as a civilian,
Right.
but when you go work for the military, it's almost like a hybrid of you've got uniform pants on, but a button down on because you're subject to the military rules in a lot of cases, but you're
Hmm.
also still a civilian.
Right.
So, so it's like one foot in, one foot out, and you can pick which way it goes.
Yeah, and it's funny because we do have some people that want to play mom against dad, I'm going to say, in the idea of you can't make me do that. I'm a civilian. But you just mentioned working in a skiff, which is a secure area, and you have to have your security clearance and you have to get, you got to get signed in and things like that. Sometimes you need an escort. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's required. It's not questioning the idea that you're untrustworthy or anything like that. It's just the rule of working in a skiff, and sometimes you can get your clearance and you can come in unescorted, but a lot of times you can't, not initially. And so you got to, when you are, kind of crossing those paths, when you are a civilian full time, but you're working for the military, you do have to understand that some of those rules do apply. And sometimes you may be the expert, you could be the subject matter expert, but somebody with rank who's, really holding the reins, so to speak, is the one really ultimately making that decision. And so you need to get buy in from them before they pull the plug on you, before they say, "Oh no, you're too, you know, different than what we're looking for, or you're not doing what I'm expecting." You got to get that buy-in. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the number of customers that you have. You have your internal customers, your external customers, your peers. I mean, there's just a whole set of people that you really have to learn to work with. And some of them get very rank happy when they're in the military, and they're very proud of their rank, and they should be. They've earned the rank, but they also understand that you're coming in as the project manager, which kind of makes you this me, the subject matter expert in putting it all together.
And to that point, when you start talking about dealing with military and rank, one of the key pieces to all of this that I saw was if you didn't serve, and this is not a slight on anybody that hasn't served, but if you didn't serve, you didn't understand the culture nearly as thoroughly as somebody who did serve.
Mhm.
You were looked at differently, you were treated differently, and there was just a different stigma, better or worse, around it.
I I hate to say it, but this was one of the things I was guilty of. We had someone come in that had never worn the uniform, and I don't know, maybe I was having a bad day or whatever it was, because I said, you've never done my job, but I've done yours. And it's and so, it's kind of like, yeah, because I wasn't in uniform at the time. I'd already retired. And so it was like they were looking at me like, what are you talking about? But I had put that military hat back on, so to speak, because I was saying, you're not getting it with the way the military mission works. And you can't just do these things, or you have to understand the little nuances that go with being, with working with the military as opposed to a straight civilian company.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier, there's a lot more rules, there's a
Hmm.
lot of structure, and there's also you talk about stakeholder engagement. Boy, is that different in working with uniformed people versus without uniforms because like we alluded to earlier, rank is the conversation stopper.
Hmm.
And ho- how many meetings have you been in with civilian and military and somebody with rank gets up and speaks and everybody else stops what they're doing in uniform, but out of uniform, they could care less, but you
Right.
have to with the rank.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that that's the big thing, Trevor, is that the person with the rank, they're in the room for a reason. They're not just, standby or whatever. They're there for a reason. And for them to stop a conversation or to hold a conversation and everybody else stops to listen and you're thinking, well, they're not on track or whatever. It goes back to what I was talking about with getting the buy-in. Sometimes it's hard to understand that this person just happens to be there, but yet they're really kind of in charge. What they say carries that much weight to everybody else in the room. And so you kind of have to regroup yourself and say, okay, so you got to work within those parameters. Um, and then to flip the script, so to speak, as a civilian, I get it. A lot of people work on salary and those type things, but there's also what's called billable hours. And so when somebody says, I'm sorry, but I'm not working until 10 o'clock at night to get this done, we can pick it up in the morning. The military is saying no mission first. We work until it's
Yeah.
completed. So yeah, and to adjust that mindset is tough sometimes on both sides.
Now I want to throw it the other direction to say, as a civilian, you hold a lot more influence and power over the military than you think because there's a lot of conversations that go on these projects with different stakeholders, different people. And
Hmm.
as a civilian, you now have the influence to raise the voice of somebody without rank as well. Because if
Right.
you're in a meeting and you throw it over and you're talking about something and there's somebody in the room with no rank who knows what they're talking about, you can throw it over to them and you can squash somebody who tries to squash them a little bit because now it's your time to be on the pedestal, so to speak.
Right, and that's a perfect example. I thank you for bringing that up because again, you're absolutely right. There are people sitting around the room that will quote unquote shut up in color because somebody with rank said something. But you, as the project manager, say, no, you know, Jack is our expert here. That's why he's at the table, even though he has a lower rank. You wouldn't say that part out loud, but you're thinking it,
Well, you
even though
you even
Jack.
could. You even could.
Well, yeah, that's true. But you say, okay, I understand Jack is one of the newest members of the military. He's not the ranking person in the room, but he is my expert right here. He's the best qualified to answer this question, to move this portion forward, to do what he does. And so the person that holds all the rank has to understand that yeah, when a project's going on, rank almost shouldn't matter. I get it. There's some protocols and things like that, but each person in that room is the subject matter expert why they're there. Let's put it that way. And so they should all be given an equal voice. And so, as that civilian program manager, you get to reassert that authority back to everyone to say, we're all on equal footing here. And this person should be should speak up and be listened to.
Yeah, so and going back to the beginning of the conversation where we talked about, action officer versus project manager in the military, that's when that role becomes so crucial to those projects is having that person that knows what they're doing, understands enough about what project management is,
Yeah.
be able to speak intelligently about the project because the higher up, it's no different in the military than it is in civilian that the higher up you go in rank or title or whatever it is, usually the less details you know about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I'm going to go back to my uniform days for just a second. I guess it kind of applies now, but more so when I was in uniform, is if you wanted to know how things were being done, you ask one of the lowest ranking people around because they're the ones that are actually doing it. Up here, the people that have gained rank and are, directing orders and stuff like that, they say make it happen, but it's the person on the ground making it happen that understands how they're doing it and what's really happening. And that's to me, that's valuable too. And it goes, and again, it goes back to giving everybody a voice that is part of that project.
Yeah. And, I've had this conversation with so many different guests about understanding your customer. And we talk about, even in the civilian world, that VP gets so high up in the org chart
Hmm.
that they forget that their customer sometimes for projects is the manual labor hourly worker,
Right.
and we don't go to those people to ask them, what do you think about this idea? We go to, well, they want this, they just don't know it.
Yeah, that's tough sometimes. um, Yeah, because I've talked with several people on different projects and things like that. I mean, it's not my primary role, but my experience, I've been there, and so I've talked to people. And you're absolutely right. Those the outside plant guys, for example, the people that are pulling cable, um, are really really important to completing some projects. Go figure. You need you need
Hmm.
that, and you need connectivity and things like that. And when they're, using fiber, for example, and they're shooting light from point A to point B, they know, now I'm going to try to remember whether it's ultra high, there's low level light, there's several different light phases that they use. that person that's shooting the light, that person that's pulling the cable, they know that. The person at the top just knows I want connectivity. They don't care if it's cable. They don't care if it's copper. They don't know that they don't want copper anymore. They just know that.
And that's the point is the person at the top could be making a decision based off of, well, I see 4 price plans, I see 4 install options, and this one will give me 500, this one will give me 5 gigs of signal, this one will
Mhm.
give me 2 gigs of signal. Let's go with the 5, but we're never going to come close. We can't even reach that bandwidth in 10 years.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and the person on the ground can tell you 2 gigs is more than enough for what you will ever need before this becomes obsolete,
Right.
and it's easier to install.
And see, and well, and again, that's the other side with on the civilian side is return on investment. If you want to pay for the 5 gig, which is, 2 times as much, twice as much, cost wise, but it sounds good, it sounds fancy. Are you really getting the worth out of it in the long run? You
Mhm.
know, um, and so, yeah, ask that person what's going to fit the bill that it's going to meet my needs for this overall project and in a timely way. When we're talking IT and we're talking systems and things like that, especially computers or whatever, I think people, get it, more so with their cell phones. And I know I'm kind of mixing projects here, but by the time you purchase it, it's already outdated. But it just takes that long to manufacture it, to get it distributed. But in the meantime, those people that are making that equipment, they're already onto their next project themselves. And so to bring it back around to that return on investment, can I buy what I need right now, knowing it's going to be outdated in just a couple of years for me to be ready for that next version to come out? Or is it still going to be sustainable, in the long run? Because your stakeholders want to know, you know, we're investing X number of dollars, X amount of time, are we really getting our worth out of it? Or should we even delay? Should we wait for that to come out so that instead of this being good for 2 years, it's going to be good for 4 or 5? All these things, that's what the project managers got to roll around in their head. They've got to think of all those things. You have to have the answers ready, you know, because like you said, you don't really have the authority. You're just there as pulling all the cards together, shuffling the deck. And so you got to have all those answers so that the project can be successful, can be on time, on budget, and meet the needs.
So, I think that's a great place to pause. And now, some words from our sponsors.
Projects slipping? Teams misaligned? Using the wrong tools? Introducing Spec C from Constructive Curiosity, the project execution software built by project managers. Spec C keeps your team aligned, your priorities clear, and progress moving. And right now, join the Spec C beta launch crew to get early access and help shape the future of project management. Sign up today at constructivecuriosity.com. Current PM software not coming through? It's time to see what Spec C can do for you.
I have a Patreon where that's how the audience can support the show.
Mhm.
There's 2 tiers to that. There's the low hanging fruit $1 a month tier, and that's just you're helping out for $1 a month, helping me cover the cost of building the show. Then there's the $5 a month drinking the Kool-Aid tier, and this is where I'm actually giving something back to you for your $5 a month because every guest I have on, including Bob, and I don't know if he knows this yet, but he's joining me for an additional 20 minutes where I'm going to be asking him pointed questions about how to get noticed if you're looking to get hired by the government. What do people that sit in Bob's seat over there look for when you submit your application? What are some things that can help you stand out from the rest trying to work for the military or the government? You know, those are all things that Bob might be discussing in that Patreon bonus episode for $5 a month. And I have one of those for every single guest that I have on. So it's not just Bob, it's everyone that's been on the show.
No, and actually, I think that that's just great, Trevor. That you are providing a service. This podcast is just it's reaching out to people that need to be educated, want to be educated about certain factors and stuff like that, and then getting that little extra to say, okay, this applies to me. Because let's face it, the world is always about you, right? I mean, so yeah, no, that's I think that's great.
Well, the idea behind it is, you know, I've I've had the fortunate luck of getting a lot of really great guests on this show. And I want to do something for the people that actually care because
Mhm.
I listen to podcasts myself and there's a lot of great information out there and sometimes I'm doing 10 things at once and I'm not paying attention.
Right.
So if I know, hey, this person over here is going to be giving me keys to the kingdom of information that I didn't have that I really want, that's worth it to me to know, okay, this is the one I need to sit down and watch and take notes on, or sit down, watch, and then I can replay it later if I
Yeah.
for the value add in it kind of thing.
Right.
Plus, you know, I don't want to give away all your secrets to everyone.
No, but again, here I go mixing apples and oranges and stuff. But, you can get what we call locker room lawyers. You can talk to the people in the office and things like that about getting advice on, whatever, shopping for a car, for example.
Hmm.
And they're going to give you their opinions and things like that. That's all well and good. And it's free advice. But when you sit down with your finance person, with your accountant, with your CPA, whoever handles your money, they're probably going to give you better advice, but you're paying them. Why are you paying them? Because you want the best advice, not just like go down to Johnny's auto dealer and, get this because, he's my neighbor, you know. So there's a big difference between paying for a service and getting a service free.
So I don't want to go get the 20% loan on the new Camaro at the car lot outside of the base.
Oh, come on down. E1's it up.
For the audience, it's not military. That's the age old joke that you get to your unit after you just got in the military. So they know you've got a guaranteed check, and then
Yeah.
they give you a terrible interest rate because you usually have no credit by the time you get to your job, and then you inevitably just get screwed.
Yeah, for the young adults that it's their first job outside of high school, and they get this check and they think, "Yes, I can go get that Camaro off base at 20% because I can afford that payment for the rest of my life."
Yeah, but so let's bring it back to the topic,
Good idea.
and you were talking about we were talking about cabling and different
Yeah.
options and stuff, and one of the things in the military world, they'll just go with whatever makes sense to whoever's making the decisions. In the civilian side, they may look at that and say, okay, well, the cable is worth the investment. The infrastructure behind it that's easily swappable is not. So let's pay extra money here for the cabling because that's not an easy swap out. And then in 3 years, we can replace the rack system because that's an easy change out when the next gen whatever comes out, because the stuff we're looking at is legacy, but it'll do us for band-aids and we really need that cable more than anything.
Yeah. No, and see, and that's an important part of the program manager, right? Is to fit all those pieces together and to be able to, you know, get everybody on board to understand that yes, we're paying extra for, part B of a three-part series, but that B will be there forever when A and C have to be swapped out.
Mhm.
Whatever that happens to be. A and C could be personnel. It could be, a whole lot of things. It just doesn't have to be equipment. It could be location. It could be, all kinds of stuff that project, involves. And there's cases where people have temp facilities, but it's best to put that temp facility up knowing, that in the long run, another facility is being built next door and that type of thing. But to become operational, we're going to put this temp facility up.
Yeah, I mean, and all of these things go into factors when you're looking at projects in the civilian world because
Hmm.
they're looking at real dollars, real cents, real decisions, and to the point of PMs P- I, PMs lead through influence. There's no argument about that.
Right.
And sometimes you as the PM are the one that needs to be going to those stakeholders or those people with rank and kind of saying, pulling them off to the side and going, "Hey, this makes more sense. Why don't you suggest it at the meeting? I'll back you up." And
Yeah.
then you get the credit for the idea, you get the bullet on your eval, you get the high five or the whatever it may be, because as a PM, your goal is to deliver. It's not to be the smartest person in the room.
Well, yeah, and I've looked at that in the idea that there's the art of sales that comes with being a PM. Because again, you've got to get buy-in from everybody on exactly what you're doing. But let's be honest, when that project's over, you're moving on. And so not to say that you're not, that you're just going to leave a mess behind. You want the best, overall completed project that's possible in the moment that you're doing it. Um, but the people that are still there, the stakeholders that, bought into all this and are doing all those things, they're going to be there for the long run. And so they're the ones that I'm going to say need the pat on the back. They need to have the background, the understanding, and the voice of the whole thing. Whereas you just put it all together, you weaved it all together, and you left, which is fine. That's what you got paid to do.
And I'm going to throw something else out too that not a lot of people consider, and that is what was taught to me is your hallway file. When you work, doesn't matter whether you're working with the government, in the military space, in the private sector, wherever you go, you know, people notice when a project is done well, or actually, let me backtrack that. People notice when a project is run poorly. They don't notice when it's run well.
See, and isn't that really the goal though? Is for
Well,
them
that
not to notice how well it ran because everything was so smooth and you didn't interrupt, you know, their quote unquote daily life. And stakeholders are big on that. They,
but that's my but that's my point though, is that by the time you move on to your next project, your reputation is already following you no
oh
matter
yeah,
where you work. And
right.
when you leave a trail of bodies, metaphorical bodies behind you, your reputation precedes you. So your next stakeholder walks in and says, "I heard you really messed this last one up. You're not going to mess this one up, are you?"
Yeah, you clearly do not want that. And that's why I say, it's kind of, it's like a movie production, right? If you watch a movie and you see all those credits run at the end of the movie, all those names, you don't have a clue as to how important they were, but they deserve the credit. And that's what the project manager is, right? They're putting it all together, and the audience, the stakeholder, is thoroughly enjoying what they got. And so the next time, the next project you move on to, they're going to say, you know what? I saw the movie and it ran wonderfully. I didn't see flaw one. There were no gaffes, none of this, and that's the reputation you want to move forward with. Is for them to say,
Or
"I saw your name in the credits, and it went well."
or even this is the one step removed, but I heard from somebody else about how you operate. And that's the kiss of death in a lot of cases, or the giant handshake that you need. It's one or the other. It's never anywhere in the middle of, if someone approaches you and says, "I heard you're just okay."
And as cliche as it is, or whatever, one "I gotcha" is going to ruin 100 attaboys. So if that next person heard the gotcha part, you messed this up, you can't go back and say, yeah, but look at these 100 projects I did beside that went well. All they're focused on is that mistake that you made. If somebody verbalized, if somebody shared the "I gotcha."
That's why we always said in the military, you're only as good as your last mistake,
Right.
not your last 20 wins. It's the stupid mistake that you made that everybody remembers you for, and that's where you get your nickname or your call sign.
Yeah.
I had a drone pilot on who he was an Air Force drone pilot, and his call sign was because of a giant mistake that he made, you know, and that's the way it goes, and it's not exclusive to the military. you're
Right.
remembered for the mistakes you make, not the wins. Because how many times do you talk to someone in conversation and they mention someone's name in passing and you're like, oh, isn't that the person that did this?
Yeah.
And it's never a positive thing.
And it's not just, it's not gossip, it's not rumors, or however it's not intended to harm that person. It's just the reality that they were dealing with. And so, yeah, when you're over time, over budget, or lacking in quality, yeah, that'll absolutely come back to haunt you. And so, I can't stress it enough. You got to be that expert. You got to make sure that it's on point, so that the I gotchas don't come out.
So I want to change topics here because I've got somebody who is so seasoned and so experienced in recruiting. I'd be remiss to the audience if I didn't ask you some questions about what recruiters look for and how you recruit,
Okay.
because we can talk about project management all year,
Well, yeah,
and
but flipping to recruiting is actually good for me because that's more my expertise.
well, yeah. So as a recruiter, specifically looking for federal employees to work both with the military and in the government, what are some best practices or things that you can give the audience that are looking to get into that world to consider when they're doing their resumes and their backgrounds and all that?
Well, and not to oversimplify it, but you really have to think about the action that you took and the impact that you had. Okay. And so, like, when we're looking for somebody, the first thing we're going to look for is what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the KSAs that the job requires. And so when you're writing your resume, or even when you're reading the job ad, let's start with reading the job ad. When you read the job ad, if you're meeting 70%, if you say yes, yes, yes to 70% of those KSAs, then go ahead and apply. But tailor your resume to address those things specifically, because we just don't have time to read between the lines of everything that you've done and all like that. It's got to be specifically for that role that you're applying to. When we started talking, at the beginning, and we talked about that transfer from the military to civilians, and a lot of times the military, they wear so many different hats because they have additional duties, and they have different missions and deployments and assignments and things. They're all wonderful, and they build a great base, but that might not be what we're looking for. And so, to be noticed, you want to highlight really what's applicable to that job ad and to that specific position.
So when you're looking at these job ads, I've heard all different techniques of ways to read them. I've heard all the tips and tricks, and
Yeah.
I'm going to bet money that the government system, the put it all in white font at the very bottom and half point size. Does that work?
No. And well, it's the reality of it is, and this is what surprises so many people, is we have real people reading these resumes. It's not, they're not screened out by a computer. A computer is not screening them, looking for keywords and then forwarding them to us. We actually have to, go through them ourselves. And so if I get 5 pages and 4 of them are blank because they used white font and small print, I'm not going to know what they put in anyway. So, yeah, don't do that.
So,
Also,
uh,
don't copy and paste the job ad into your resume to say, yes, I have all these knowledge, skills, and abilities, because that doesn't
so
work either.
so let me ask you this one then. So as you're filling out your resume and everything,
Hmm.
is it is when you're reading, actually, let me rephrase that. When you're reading the resume,
Yeah,
I've heard all different numbers of how much time you spend, where you go to, formatting. What are some best practices that you can give the audience for those types of things, at least on the United States federal government side?
sure. And really, Trevor, that's a great question, especially right now, because the government is shifting. We used to say, give us your entire life history. I don't care if your resume is 6 or 7 pages, we'll take it. Now they're saying, we're doing our hiring now. We're looking for 2 pages, 2 pages only. Okay. And so you really do have to focus on really laser focused, if you will, on what's in the job ad. What I suggest to people is to take the job ad, copy it, paste it into a Word document or whatever, text you'd like to use, because, not everybody uses Word, but most people do. So copy it into that and use that as your checklist to say, they asked for A. Okay, here's where I explained that I did A and how well I did it. They asked for B. Oh, I didn't do B. Don't put it in your resume if you didn't do it, you
And
know?
when you check it off, make it as clear as you possibly can that you've done that skill set or that role.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
saying I was a project manager, if it says I need 5 years as a project manager and you were 3 years as a project coordinator, that doesn't cut it. You have to
Right.
be 5 years as a PM.
Yes. Yes. And that's a big, big thing is, we don't have the luxury of, like I said, reading between the lines a whole lot of times and stuff. Um, and so I've heard the rumors, people, recruiters spend 6 seconds per resume or they spend, 20 seconds or whatever. Myself, the team that I work on, no, we spend more time than that. Um, but if you get it in your mind that that's all that the recruiter is going to spend on you, then you can become focused on what you're writing so that it really does make an impact. Um, and to compare it to something that people understand is commercials. There are some commercials that you'll watch it and you catch part and stuff like that. And then later you see the commercial and you see that it's an edited version of the commercial you saw an hour ago.
Or
Go
you
ahead.
see the commercial and you use the catchphrase, it becomes common language in our vernacular, and then
Yes.
someone says, what's that commercial for?" And everyone just scratches their head going, "I don't know."
I don't know. And you do not want somebody to look at your resume and go, I don't know. I don't know what they're
So
selling me, but you do want to become that focused to say, this is what stood out, because it has to, just again, be cliche about it. It's got to jump off the page. It's got
draw
to
it with
make sense,
crayons.
but it's got to make sense to somebody that's never done it.
That
Okay.
is a great
That's
point.
that's the biggest thing is, yeah, I have a background before I went into recruiting. I have a background in communications. I was, crypto maintenance guy, so I worked on equipment and stuff like that. So I understood comm. And that's why they hired me to be a cyber recruiter because I had already worked in that field. Okay. But the reality of it is that not every recruiter has that, specified background. And so if they're reading it and you're talking about project management and you're using acronyms or you're using, jargon that's, career specific and, the recruiter's shaking their head like, yeah, I don't get that. They're going to move on to somebody's resume that they understand. So not only do you have to say, okay, this is, what I did, or why I even was hired to do it. I was hired to do this. I took these actions and this was the outcome of it. You have to make it understandable as if you were telling, that fourth grader that's never heard of it, but you're at their career day, at elementary school. It's got to sound wow to them. They have to understand. Really? You came in and it was just a cornfield before you got there, and now there's a big comm center where I can call my grandmother from? That's what they want to know. And I know it's a really kind of mixed up example of it,
Well,
but
it makes
you know,
sense. And now is the point where we get to my hand-picked question for my guest.
okay.
Now, there's no hidden message in this. It's just pure fun.
Okay.
So we've all watched, I'm sure most of us have watched The Office.
Yes.
And Dwight has his resume, and then he's always talking about, oh, I didn't have my ninja skills and everything else on there. What are some of the skills that you've seen on resumes where you just look at it and go, why is this here and why am I reading this?
Well, in all honesty, I mean, it's going to sound funny because no, I haven't seen ninja skills. All right. I got a story about ninja, but that's a whole separate story. Okay. But what I'm seeing that it's just too old, it's old school is I'm proficient in Microsoft Office. I'm proficient in Word or Excel, or I do great, it's like everybody is good with Word now. I mean, it's got, even Word will do your autocorrect and things like that. I don't need to know. Don't waste the real estate on your resume saying that you're proficient in Microsoft Office.
Well, what are some of the ones where you just saw them and you're like, wow, that's what you wanted to put on there for me to know about you?
On the upside or the what were they
The
thinking side?
what were they thinking side?
Okay. Um, sometimes I've seen things where, again, it wasn't career specific where they're telling me about, working at the farm market. I learned, job discipline when I worked at the farm market, and it's not applicable. I mean, your career specific experience, the job that you're applying to, that specific experience, how you got there is really not important to us. And yeah, the farm market, that was my kind of out there one moment. And it was only one out of the thousands of resumes that I read, but it kind of stood out. And earlier when we were talking about those transferable skills and stuff, I don't need to know that you worked your way up in rank or even in title to get that skill. I want to see how you used that skill.
Well, I think that's a great stopping point for this, Bob.
Okay.
I've had a blast talking to you, and I'm sure the audience has enjoyed it.
I
Why
hope
don't
so.
you why don't you tell them where they can find you and anything you want to share with the audience?
Okay, well, couple of things. One, if you're looking for me personally, I'm Bob Hall on LinkedIn. You can look me up. I'm a recruiter on LinkedIn, and absolutely, I'm looking to make connections and things like that, because despite the fact that I work for the Department of the Air Force and I recruit for Air Force Civilian Service, it's just a short story. Nobody ever pulled me aside when I was a kid and said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" I mean, I'm sure that they did, but I just don't remember that. So my goal, ever since I became a recruiter in 1990, a long time ago, that's kind of been my goal, right? Is to say, okay, where do you want to go? What is it that you want to do, and how can I get you there? And I've been kind of called out on a couple of occasions with, Bob, what are you doing? They're not, joining our team. No, but I know how they can get this job someplace else. So I'm willing to do that. Bob Hall is willing to help you get a job outside of the Air Force. I don't do uniforms anymore. I don't put people in uniform at all. I recruit civilians to be civilians. Okay. But if we can't hire you, I'll be more than happy to help you with your resume to find a job someplace else. And yeah, I actually have friends outside of the Air Force. So I do know some things. I do know people that are hiring outside of us.
And I'll have your LinkedIn in the show notes.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. So with that, like, subscribe, and follow on all the platforms for the show. As I mentioned earlier, we have the Patreon where as soon as we wrap this up, we're getting Bob right back on to talk on the Patreon episode where I'm going to be asking him a lot more questions about what he looks for as a recruiter. And you don't want to miss that if you want to work for the government. So like, subscribe, do all the usual stuff. Thank you for listening, and may all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Bob Hall, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.